The HX Collective explores the human experience through three main channels of life: work, relationships, and self. With raw, authentic conversations, the podcast investigates how challenges can become powerful teachers, leading to personal growth and deeper connections. Rooted in humanity-centered design, each episode reflects a commitment to doing good and doing well, featuring diverse voices and generational perspectives. Expect gripping stories of struggle and success, with thought-provoking discussions and concrete tools and tactics that encourage you to rethink your relationship with distress, helping you to establish your full human experience. This is the HX Collective channel. Hello, friends, and welcome to the next episode of the HX Collective podcast, where my guest and I have conversations united around a clear mission. How can we elevate human flourishing through the lens of work, through the lens of relationships, and through the lens of ourselves? Today, we are in for such a treat because this is our next round of conversations with HX Ally Ali Schroer. Ali, I am so happy that our audience is going to get to pick up our conversation as we talk about human flourishing through the lens of what you do professionally and the way that you move and contribute to community and families and people through your life on a personal basis. So, Ali, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, before we dig into today's conversation, I always want people to know who our HX Collective allies are. So, Ali, if you will humor us, give us a little bit of our background and backstory on how we ultimately got connected, and then we'll dig into our conversation around family and thinking about family as an organization. But first things first, tell us a little bit more about you.
Well, thank you, Deb. Yes, so I'm so happy to be here and be reconnected again with you and with the HX Collective. So I am a licensed clinical social worker. I'm the founder of the corporate wellbeing firm called Mental Scope Consulting. And most of my work is with law firms and professional service organizations. And I do both sides of well-being. I really do the reactive side, which is helping people, helping teams in crisis, in burnout, navigating the new, angst and anxiety around AI. And then I also do the proactive side, which is building programming habits before any crises hit and thinking about how to really support the organization from the inside out. What ties it all together is human flourishing, which is exactly why we're here. I care about whether people are actually doing well and not just performing well. And what I keep seeing is that there's a gap between those two things, and it shows up more clearly, not just in the office, but also at home. And so that's the conversation that I'm so excited to have with you today, is thinking about that bridge between those. But it's why it matters to me. We design our cultures and our operating models for a living, but then we go home and we let most of that organization that we run at home kind of go on these default settings. So I'm happy to have this conversation and be back here with you. And you and I connected over many years working with law firms and financial service companies and other professional service companies, just thinking about human flourishing. So happy to be here.
Well, Ali, it's so funny. Right before we started recording this podcast, we were both talking about some recent family situations. I had just hosted my husband's family for our second annual family reunion, had 30 people, and just this concept of who I am in the context of this family and this extended family. I know you shared with me that you were with your family. We're recording this during summer. And just this idea of well-being, not only being the thing that we see through the lens of our professional lives, but really how critical it is to recognize that we're whole beings, and that well-being and whole being really come to mind when I hear you describe the nature of what we're doing. So I know confidently, because we do share clients and get to collaborate often in our work lives, you work and coach some of the highest performers, some of the most prominent leaders. You spend really effective and impactful time with lawyers and see professionals on a general basis when they're on their A game and when they are leading in the context of their work and their practices and with clients. What are some of the attributes that you think connect the dots that really make these high performers effective first when they're leading at work? And then we're going to talk about what that means then leading well in their families. But first, what do you see that connects the dots for these A players?
That's a great question. And you're right. This is where I spend a lot of my time. The biggest one I would say is intentionality. High performers do not leave things to chance. They set a vision, they define their roles, they communicate expectations, they review how things are going. And they're also great at these feedback loops. And so when something breaks at work, they don't just get frustrated. They run a retro and they fix the system and they invest in relationships deliberately, right? They have that intentionality that they really try to cultivate. And so whether it's these one-on-ones or they have recognition or they have development plans, whatever they do to build intentionality into the design. And since it is designed, that is something that I think like really pushes those high performers to be at that next level.
Well, I love this word intentionality because it's such a through line in high performance, in total. And I think left to our own devices, you could be a really smart, effective leader. And if you don't become very planful around relationships and around human connection, it doesn't necessarily create that positive environment or doesn't create an environment where flourishing and that well-being can take place. When
Mhm.
you think about what these high performers are doing, particularly when it comes to that intentionality, what do you see that they're doing to create that positivity? And what are some of the benefits that maybe you've seen when they are so intentional?
I think the first thing that people do is that they make these leaders help people feel seen. They just really show up to get to know people on that human level. And the best leaders that I coach and work with as, therapy, and then again, that proactive side that I do as well, they try to motivate each person on their team. They tailor how they lead to the individual. And really, they create what's important to me is psychological safety, meaning
Yeah.
that people can raise a problem with them without fear, without, feeling that they're going to be in trouble somehow. They do a good job celebrating progress and not just outcomes. But when people feel seen and they have that psychological safety, they feel known, they feel appreciated, that's really when people flourish. And that's true in law firms, and it's true around the dinner table with families as well, right? And so I think that creating that relationship is really probably the most important thing that they do.
I think, this concept of celebrating the progress and not just the end outcome is such a critical uh, it's such a critical priority, and yet sometimes it can be a growth area where we have some blind spots, and particularly when time is such a premium. And often people think about relationships and want the relationship element to be efficient. And human beings, we're not efficient in how we love one another. Yet, it's so
Yeah.
important to really drive, I think, some of that intentionality. What are some of the growth areas that you find yourself coaching in, particularly when leaders are wanting to really have that positive affect on their organizations, but maybe they're struggling?
So there's a few things that come to mind. I would say probably three most consistently. The first is that they're listening to understand rather than listening to respond. And that's, also a principle of therapy. And the background in the work that I do is that we really do want to listen to understand and not just to be the one to be the talker. High performers are trained to solve and they jump into solutions before the other person feels heard. And so is something that I am constantly working with leaders and leadership on how do they do it. The second is emotional regulation under stress, really understanding how to manage your own emotions, manage your own feelings when you do feel overwhelmed, when you do feel stressed and that there's a lot going on. So emotional regulation is key to leaders, and I would say key to humans. It's not just to leaders in a law firm or a professional setting. And then third is boundaries. Many of the clients that I work with have no off switch, and people around them are absorbing the cost of that. And so, coming up with something, I talk about work life harmony, not work life balance. It's different for everybody, but what does that harmony look like so that you can have some boundaries and have, even if it's not off, it's idle, that you have an idle time, that you have the people around you that don't have to absorb the cost of you always feeling on.
Yeah. Wow. What an important construct. And I'm thinking about this, through the lens of some of the things I struggle with as a leader. And I love that you are amplifying this idea of work-life harmony. I think work-life integration is just
Yep.
it's just a crock. It's just not possible to have things feel like they're in equilibrium or balance. But this idea of having an idle switch, is so critical. And I can imagine, again, so much of when we are geared to produce, create outcomes, that having that capacity to stay regulated when we're under stress and to recognize that listening is really a function of we've got two ears, one mouth. Let's
Yes,
use them
exactly.
proportionately. I
Yes.
can imagine there's a lot of impact when a leader can embrace that.
Yep.
You mentioned, though, a moment ago that a lot of these skill sets are again, just essential for human experience.
Yeah.
And that human experience isn't only in the workplace. This also can be around a dinner table. And you, as we were preparing for today's discussion, you brought something to mind that I hadn't really considered around this intersection of our families being a form of an organization. And I'd love for
Absolutely.
you to now maybe bridge that because it really was an eye opener for me when I started thinking about my own family. What does that mean? And how are families like an organization?
Yeah. It's funny because you are one of many that I've kind of had a similar conversation with, and people are constantly saying, like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about it that way. But a family really does have everything an organization has. It has a mission, whether you name it or not. It has stakeholders with just different needs. It has a budget. It has a calendar. It has an operating rhythm. It has a culture. It has a communication style, even. Right. And so it does even have, I laugh when I say this, but like onboarding, right? When a child is born and there's new kids that come into the mix, right? There's all these different complexities that happen in organizations that absolutely happen in families as well. But the difference is that most organizations write these things down. They talk about them. They spend a lot of time and energy strategizing around them. What does this mean? And what is our mission? And how do we do this? And that's not things many families ever do. And so a family runs on this inherited default, whether we want to be like our parents or our past or not, whether we're trying to be the opposite even of some of what our parents did and create this new culture. But back to intentionality, when we don't have the intentionality, there is this default setting. And so part of what I try to teach people when it comes to having this harmony, this integration of this work-life balance, so to speak, that we talk about, we want to be intentional with our families as well. Because what we see is that when somebody is crushing it on the work side and that their family is having a really difficult season or some challenges that are going on, is that maybe we also need to put some intentionality in ways that we haven't thought about before around our family. And so those are some of those kind of ways that I see the similarities.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you just occurred to me. I said work-life integration is the move of harmony. Work-life balance is the crock. So I need to be
Yeah.
really clear. That's what I intended, is that this idea of thinking about work and life sort of in equal parts, but it makes so much sense because the level of intentionality that you might apply in the workplace and that just requires the norms, it almost doesn't exist in our
Yeah.
personal lives. And it makes so much sense that absent a game plan, you've got a game plan, right? There's
Yes.
always something in play.
Yeah.
Why do we miss this? Why I can't even it strikes me that our families are, as you said, they've got every element of an organization, and yet we don't have any of this sort
Yeah.
of declared or written. Or why do we miss this, do you think?
I think the true answer is because love feels like it should be enough. And that we assume if we care deeply enough, the structure will kind of take care of itself. And that's why when, I just answered that question, is I really want to be thoughtful that people do put in just as much time and energy into their families, leaders and anybody, right? Professionals put in just as much time and energy potentially into their families, but it's without that intentionality. They don't know how, they don't know what to do. So they just hope and pray that, love is enough and that if we care enough, it will kind of take care of itself. But we never really accept that logic at work, right? No one says, well, I care about this company so much, so I don't need a strategy. And the other reason that family, I think, feels like it's a place where you want to stop performing, you want to be authentic, you want to be able to like kind of kick your shoes off and be yourself. And so structure at home feels like having work. And that's actually not what I'm alluding to at all. What actually happens is that a good structure creates rest and it creates the connection that people are craving. And so it doesn't have to be as intense. It doesn't have to be like, a written plan necessarily, but it needs to be thought about in a way so that we don't miss this and that there are kind of some pieces that we can be doing to really support our families.
Yeah. Well, that's really important insight. Like you're right. As a leader of an organization, you wouldn't just operate. Hope is not a strategy, right?
Yeah.
That idea that if I care enough about this business or these people, performance will occur. And yet there is that, I think, that big disconnect. You get to see people, as you said, there is the responsive form of well-being and how you're coaching or counseling. And then there is this proactive. When a leader is making that transition, and whether that leader has the role of spouse or parent, sometimes leaders are transitioning into being siblings or an adult child of someone. Where do you see the breakdowns happening the most when those transitions are occurring, in leadership inside of families?
I would say probably the most common is when they leave the office, right? Whether that is virtually leave the office and then they try to like pivot from being upstairs back into the kitchen and getting dinner ready, or it's when they physically are leaving the office. They bring home the exhaustion and they kind of leave the skills, if you will. At work, they'd never skip these one-to-ones that they need, but at home, when there's a struggling member, if it's a teenager or somebody else, that weeks go on without this real conversation. And so the breakdown happens when they are really coming home. And I also think at home, the feedback sometimes comes out as criticism, whether they're tired and they're depleted from the actual workday. And so the breakdown is like, I'm trying to be responsive. I'm trying to have these conversations. I'm trying to be intentional, but I'm just too tired and too overwhelmed. And I'm still thinking about all the things that just went on 3 hours ago. And I have to do X, Y, and Z still. And so then it kind of leads to this confusion and frustration pattern. And so we try to think about the breakdown really happening at that transition point. But also, I would say, kind of on the flip side, when people are getting out the door in the morning too, patients are low when you've got a lot of things on your plate and a lot of things to get to on the work side.
Yeah. Boy, you just given me like I love talking with you, Ali. And every time we have a guest, I have this moment of like deep conviction.
Yeah.
And you are so right. We wouldn't skip a one-to-one in the context of work in the workplace or with our
Right.
clients. We wouldn't miss those opportunities. And yet how quickly the breakdown of one-to-ones in our own home, it's so
Yeah.
easy to just kick those over. And you've just inspired me as a parent of three children. I'm thinking, man, I've got to really be mindful of how quick and easy it is, or spending, one-on-one time with my spouse just to have that point of connection and how I can see where those transitions can be such a critical piece of importance. And so as we think about models and what does a healthy family, look like? If you were to outline for us, when a family is healthy and it runs like a healthy organization, what is the model that we could start to look to or towards to create that healthiness?
That's a great question. I wish that there was like an actual playbook, right? Wouldn't that just be too easy and too handy? So, this is kind of my viewpoint. And again, from many, many years of experience, 18 years as a clinician and working with organizations. So, there's four things that I think kind of a healthy family organization could use to run by. And I give a little asterisk because every family is different. The cultural lens is also different. And so I don't want to be naive in thinking that like this is the playbook. It's not. It is kind of my take on general principles that I would be looking for. The first would be that there's some sort of shared purpose that we've, talked about, that our family, who we are, what we value. Again, you can think about that with kind of that cultural context, that religious context, if that's important to your family or not. Maybe nature is really important, but thinking about what is our shared purpose, clear roles and expectations, that everybody has something that they are going to carry and bring. And that's fair. And that's kind of important. Rhythms, I could spend a lot of time talking about. It's kind of that regular, nuanced connection time, the planning, right? How do we prepare when and how do we repair when something breaks as well? And so the rhythms of our day and our lives are really, really important. And then finally is this culture of feedback. How do we give feedback to somebody? Do we snap at somebody? Do we yell in our family? Do we not yell? Do we have conversations? What do you say when something isn't working? Right? How do you do those things and you take them seriously? And I would say that one, especially the feedback piece, is something that, I mean, I'm a parent myself and I have 2 kids. I don't always get it right. I absolutely mess up sometimes too, especially when I'm cranky and I'm overrun by other things and overwhelmed. But that one is something to spend some time thinking about. How do we kind of create this feedback so that people know where they stand in our family and what's important? And so it helps kind of with these overlying functions. But those are the 4 that I would say are probably most significant.
All right. I would love to take a little deep dive or a little bit of a deep dive on all 4 of them. And I am thinking, yeah, when I look at like the purpose of our family and sort of the anchoring device, have you seen examples where that particular element really helps stakeholders in the family thrive or flourish? Can you give some examples of like practical ways? So if I were saying like, okay, I want to be more intentional on that element in my family, what are some things that you've seen work?
Yeah, I mean, the first answer is the easiest and the hardest of awareness, right? I named those 4 things, and then you're like, okay, it's going to take you a beat to say, gosh, I really like maybe we don't think about feedback with our kids, or maybe we don't think about feedback as partners. So let's take a minute to like build some awareness around that. What do I do? What do I like? What do I not like? And then see if you can build on it from there. So the awareness is kind of the 101. And then the other thing that the families really need to thrive then is to go back to that psychological safety, that they need to feel safe and they need to feel seen and they need to feel like they matter. And so it doesn't just mean emotional safety or physical safety, it really means both of those things. And so we have to then create the time to look at one of those 4 things. So again, I kind of gave the example of feedback, but if we're talking about shared purpose, right? Where do we bring value? What's important to our family? It's back to the awareness of, okay, maybe we haven't really done that intentionally. Maybe we want to have some time thinking about that. Let's talk as a family. Let's have a little family meeting over eating spaghetti. And we're going to say, like, hey, do you guys know you can ask this question to 6-year-olds and 16-year-olds all the same? Hey, do you know what's important to our family? Do you know what we value? A 6-year-old's going to go, huh? What's value? And you say, it's something that's important to us. And a 16-year-old's going to roll their eyes at you and tell you, no, what's the difference? And you're going to say, actually, something that we really value is family time, or we value our religious organization, or we nature, right? And so that getting kind of a moment to have a conversation helps people to feel seen and heard and build that psychological safety around whatever of those 4 principles you think you want to lead into.
Well, so I can imagine, as you said, and it's not a singular. Once we said it, we forget it. Like it's this ability to reinforce and sort of refresh. I'm curious to know when you think about stakeholders thriving inside of a family organization, have you seen any particular things around roles or rhythm or again feedback? I just feel like having a sense of just something so simple like asking your family, do you know what's important to us? Like what are the things that we share our value? Are there other examples that you have in any of the other areas that allow our stakeholders to thrive?
Yeah. I mean, I think the rhythm one, like I said, like I could talk about this a lot. The rhythm one is interesting because it happens by happenstance so much in families. Is that it's like, mom cooks breakfast or dad does the dishes and then mom takes him to school and dad does this or mom too does that or whatever it may be, right? Like, or sibling does that. We don't really think about the rhythm and the cadence of the day of like when we wake up and what does that feel like in the morning. And so another simple way is to just ask yourself, that awareness is really that key piece of this, and to say like, how do I want our rhythm to go? Our mornings, I've worked with many people that will say like, our mornings are terrible. We're in a rush. We're trying to do too many things, or I'm not a morning person. Like mornings are the worst. I have 2 toddlers. That's the worst time, right? Whatever it is. And so you'd ask yourself, what do I want my morning to look like? What do I wish? What is that wishful thinking to be? Well, I wish we woke up without screaming and crying. I wish we woke up without being in a rush. There's a proactive, very practical piece of that when it comes to like a family organization of like, should I prep lunches the night before, right? Like there's some of those kind of simple things. And then there's also, I'm not a morning person. You are a morning person. Why do I wake up every morning with the kids? Or why do I do this? Why don't you do that? Or why don't we, the sibling, let's give them that value and that responsibility that they're going to help. Or we're going to like empower our kids to take that step and like put their clothes on by themselves, depending on if it's age appropriate. So I think the rhythm piece is really one that you can get in the weeds on, but can be really effective and helpful in thinking about how you want that cadence to go. And that practical side of me really comes out of like, well, does this work? Does this not work? Change it. Does this work? Does this not work? And there's like, I say there's a science experiment involved, and let's give it a shot for 2 weeks and see how it goes.
It's coming to mind. I'm drawing the parallels when you describe about rhythms at home. Again, the workplace, there's so many elements of, we know what time of day it's going to be best to do our creative and design. We know,
Exactly.
the rhythms of like when it's time to like do independent work, everybody working individually, when we're going to have the most energy. And it
Yep.
seems like such a blind spot to miss that if we look at our families as organizations, yeah, no kidding. Like the same things would apply. Are there other blind spots, or are there things that you see that families maybe do unwittingly that can actually make their families be an unhealthy organization?
Yeah. I think that the biggest one that I see most often is assuming that silence means that everything is fine. In organizations, we know that silence usually means that maybe people have stopped bothering to raise issues. It's like, forget it. It's not even worth my energy and my effort anymore. A good organization, in my opinion, has a constant conversation about like, how do we up our game? How do we change things? How do we get ahead of something, right? It doesn't have to be loud. It can be on the back burner, but there's like this constant innovative side of like creativity and trying to, get ahead of things. And when families get silent, that is often when I see them reach out to me, that they don't either know how to have these conversations, they don't know how to raise issues anymore, and they just assume that like no talking is good news. And I would say talking is better. And so kind of these unspoken resentment things can build up when we are not actually saying things out loud.
Yeah.
And then the other is that when we're treating kind of symptoms instead of looking at it as an organization, I see this a lot. My background initially, when I working many, many years ago, started in family therapy. And so that's why I can work so well with organizations, because I see organizations as this large family. And so we want to be thinking about not just the symptom or the symptom child or the symptom person in an organization or in a family, but we really want to be thinking about the context and the system that they work in around that as well. And so is somebody acting out, or is somebody like not performing well at work? And what are some of those other environmental factors that we want to look at too?
What an important consideration, instead of looking at, because I do think in the family context that we are moving from symptom to symptom to symptom, and not pausing to really be curious to get to the heart of the root cause, or what's the context that's creating the environment for these outcomes. I'm confident that right now people who are listening are probably having a lot of the same ahas and convictions that I'm having about being, more intentional and being far more aware. You mentioned your expertise and the family work that you do. And one of the concepts that you introduced to me as a part of that larger practice is this idea of family system therapy. And it just makes so much sense to me. And if people haven't had the opportunity to work with a therapist, or have not worked in a context of working with a professional coach, what is family?
It's an approach that says you really can't understand one person apart from the system that they live in and that they function in. I will say that as well. Instead of just asking what's wrong with the individual, it asks what role is this behavior playing in the family? The family is one emotional unit. So anxiety moves through a family, and patterns repeat across generations, and roles get assigned without anybody deciding, as we've talked about. There's the hero, there's the peacemaker, there's the scapegoat, right? All these things happen. And so when one person changes, the whole system has to change and reorganize around that person. So it comes largely out of, kind of many, many years of work, and other clinicians who've come before me that have paved the road and said that nobody's struggle is just theirs, that we really are part of a larger system.
That concept of becoming healthy, and how when we see our family like a system or an organization, it's possible for things to be better or different. So when you're thinking about a family leader, what are the things that they're learning when they come through family systems therapy? So are there habits, are there activities that allow them to see their family as one holistic unit as opposed to the sum of individual people?
I think that when they're trying to see their family and learn a little bit through their family, they might be looking more to see patterns. I think that when we start to look at patterns, we're looking at kind of the differentiation between different people, meaning how do we stay connected to people that you love without controlling them, without controlling their emotions. And so we're trying to like see these patterns, but also not be in charge of somebody else's patterns and like be able to, I don't know, work cohesively in some ways. I don't know. I think that's a really difficult question to think about. Leaders have to look at their families in kind of this unique individualistic lens. I don't know if that answers your question. Does that
It
answer
is.
it?
Well, I think, well, and I guess maybe what when I look at there are protocols that a professional like you has, and I'm often intrigued by saying like when it works. Sometimes it may be difficult for people to say, you know what, I'm going to lean in and going to seek outside advice or counseling, and when I'm imagining in what you've just described really answers this, it is this recognition that if we aren't, first of all, looking at our family like it's an actual system or an organization, we're probably missing a lot. But then
Yeah.
when we begin to really see that and understanding the patterns that are the dynamic, if you will, that is occurring, how as the leader we don't overfunction or we don't become. I'm almost thinking like autocratic in the sense of,
Yes,
I'm going to
exactly.
fix this family, and I think that's
Exactly.
probably the same consideration when we look at how these therapies can actually apply when we're leading in our organization. When you look at what works well in families and what works in the workplace, are there applications of things that you've seen work well so a leader can thrive, whether they're at work or at home? Are there insights that you can share with us that lead to that kind of human flourishing in either of the context as leaders?
Part of it is that work does a few things that are different than what home does. And so I think that that's maybe where I want to start for just a second first. And then I'm going to answer your question. But for me, work creates a lot of like clarity around your role. There's feedback, there's like wins that you can measure, right? And so I think that sometimes when we want to apply family systems therapy or therapy in general, right, to this idea of therapy to our work side, we don't always see it from that way because we see those like roles and we see the feedback and we see the wins that we can measure. But I would say all of that is included in that family systems lens as well. But home doesn't give you like the scoreboard, and home doesn't let you like kind of reap the rewards almost that work does. Work has this kind of piece that is built in when we earn money. There is something to it. And at home, we're just asking you to work hard. And the outcomes are this long haul. We're really like looking at the long game here, right? That we want to have like a happy, functioning family. We want our kids to do well. We want our spouses to do well. And so it's tricky to think about how are we going to kind of like bridge that gap. But one of the other things I think that organizations can do to your exact question is kind of like apply this and think about that one, anxiety cascades from leadership through the teams in the way that it moves through a household. So teams are assigned, this role or this task that they're going to do. Families have this large mission that they like want to be functioning happy humans in life and they want to be doing those things. And so anxiety moves through people in the same way that it moves through organizations. And so that is one way that we can start to like kind of look at organizations and families in a similar lens. And also that firms, organizations have multi-generational patterns in the
Right.
same way that family therapy teaches us that families do as well.
Yeah.
So we look at, if I use law firms for an example, how were associates treated 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago? Because those people are still going to be passing that information along in the same way that generationally families do as well. So we can start to see that we look at kind of this long term lens through this systems approach, not necessarily therapy, but through a systems approach. And that can be applied both to organizations as well as families. Does that answer your question?
Oh my gosh, it answers it like 10 different ways. And I really appreciate this concept of this notion of multi-generational because I'm imagining right now if people are again starting to apply the things that you're describing, it's not only the things that we're doing, but it's also the things we're going to stop doing. And I'm suspecting that, if we look at our families through how they've been informed by the generations, there's probably norms and patterns and ways of engaging that are rooted in things of the past that if we took a step back and we really reflected on the present circumstance, there's like old things that are just simply not required anymore. Like there's
Yes,
just old habits or patterns of the ways that we engage with
that's
things,
right.
on a really practical level, like morning routine, but also how we, might navigate, sort of those longer range goals or priorities, purposes, if you will, of our families. So yeah, my mind's moving in a million different directions, which is,
Well,
I'm
old
sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
go
I
ahead.
was gonna say old habits die hard, right? Like, that's how this goes, right? We are creatures of habit. And so to change that, it takes that intentionality again, it takes some awareness, it takes a minute to think. And so even as, Deb, we're sitting here having this conversation, I would be silly, it would be ignorant of me to not say, like, it does take a minute for all of this to, like, actually think about this, right? I'm asking you to have, like, a little bit of time of your day for thinking. And even that is an ask. And I know that, right? Even from myself, we're busy, we've got a million things to do. But if we want to really kind of look at our family life with that organizational lens and vice versa, I would say, then we really want to like take a beat and just think about it. And so if that means thinking about it in the evening or thinking about it in the morning or thinking about it while you have coffee, like how is my family like my law firm or how is my financial firm like my family, right? Whatever it is, it does take a second to think about that. And that helps to kind of weed out some of those old habits dying hard.
Yeah. Well, as one thing as we do on the HX Collective podcast is we always want our listeners to have some very practical takeaways. And
Yes.
I'd love, as if someone's listening right now, I want to talk about both mindset shifts and then like practical actions. So, if there were important shifts of mindset that a person could do as a family leader, where you could export some of the things that maybe make us really effective in the workplace and we bring that into our families, what are some mindset shifts that listeners can take away?
All right. I'm going to go with three. Okay. Here we go. The first, I got to think as I talk here, but the first is going to be move from default to design.
Okay.
So if you've never let your team run without intention, don't let your family run without intention. Decide what you're building. Okay, that's going to be number one. Number two, mindset shift. Let's move from fixing people to tending our systems. So when something feels off at home, ask what pattern is producing this and not who's at fault. So we're going to, again, look at things as the system perspective rather than an individualistic, identified a person problem perspective. And then the last would be, I would say, like moving from performance to presence. At work, you're valued for your output, but at home, you're really needed for your attention. It's a different job, so it's a different metric, but I would say that that's really critical is that presence is really, really critical on the home front. And I'm going to add in one for like a bonus. Added bonus is that I would say if you want to shift the mindset that really understanding that repair matters more than perfection.
Yeah.
Truly, I am not a perfect parent or perfect spouse. My husband can attest to that, right? I try my very best. I do have intentionality in what I do most of the time, but I am a human. We are human beings. We mess up.
Yeah.
And the research really says that strong relationships show that healthy ones are ones that learn how to repair. So, repair over perfection always is a very key piece, not just in your family, but also at home.
Wow, those are such important shifts. And I'm so glad you brought in the notion of repair. I would love if you could take just a deeper dive. If somebody wanted to become masterful at that action of repair, are there
Yeah.
things that people can do to really demonstrate that to create healthy relationships in their families? Well, frankly, in every aspect of their life, but
Yeah.
specifically, what do you do to really step into that mastery of repair?
Yeah. The first goes back to one of the ones I just mentioned too, is that attention, right? That presence. One of the ways that you can have a solid kind of repair plan, if you will, is to give it some attention and to be present. And so you can catch yourself in the moment, right? I will give a personal example here this week. lots of things happening, trying to work, trying to parent, trying to get my kids to camp, all the things. I was running short on time. I was running short on patience. I could feel it on the inside. And then my kids asked for like one more thing that they definitely did not need. And I was like, you know what? And I could hear my tone and I could hear it. And I said something to the effect of like, we are so lucky. You should be fortunate for what you have, blah, blah, blah. And I went on this whole, 2-minute rant of like how fortunate we are. And then I caught myself of like, one, that was not like an age appropriate conversation for my kids. And it wasn't really helpful to our day. And it wasn't helping them to get them where they needed to go in that moment. And so I caught myself and I was present as I'm driving and I'm like hearing myself and replaying what I just said. I was like, one, my words might have been helpful, but my tone was not. They couldn't hear what I was saying. And so I said in that moment, we pulled into camp and I parked the car and I said, hey guys, I just want to say I'm really sorry for my tone. The message of what I was trying to teach you was this. So I went back to what I was actually trying to say. And I'm really sorry that my tone came out a little bit snippy. And my older one said, you sound mad. And I said, I'm not mad. I was really frustrated because I was running short on time and I was feeling the pressure of the day. And I'm sorry for that. And so that example is just to say, one, I'm not perfect either, of course, but two, that repair really comes in lots of forms and figures. It can come when you're parking the car at camp, but it comes with this sense of that you have to be present to catch yourself in those repair moments. There's another practice that I've used with people. Some people like to look, the sun goes down and moods go down and they look at their day and they ask themselves, is there anything from today that I need to repair tomorrow? I think
Oh,
that can be helpful for some people. For other people, that creates a swirl and a spiral of anxiety and angst. So if that's you, don't do that, right? Think about what works for you, but just giving yourself this moment to be present of, is there something that I can repair, which is better than perfection anyway? There's lessons in it that are great for kids, families, and your organization.
I love that. Well, first of all, Allie, this conversation has left me feeling inspired, and I'm confident that others are listening are feeling the same way. Is that even just marrying the idea that, our family is one of the most important organizations that we're ever going to lead or that we're ever going to run. Can you give us some encouragement? You've certainly seen leaders get it right. You've seen families heal. What are some practical things that might give us encouragement to even take on any one of your principles if we want to look at purpose or roles or rhythms or feedback? Like what are some of the things that you would highly recommend if someone was going to take a next step to be encouraged?
I love this question, Deb, because you know as well as I, because you know me well, that I'm a very practical person. Like I love a good tangible takeaway. It just helps you like have something to hold on to instead of just the concept of this. So here's a few that I kind of live by myself. One is that I put my important relationships actually on the calendar, just like I do with my clients. So if my husband and I haven't had a good date night or a moment together in a while, same thing with my kids. I try to to structure some special time. I put these important relationships, my parents, my sister, on the calendar. And so it's a standing date that you can count on. It's that one-to-one that you definitely will blow off when work gets busy. And so when it's on the calendar, it's really helpful. If it's not scheduled, it really, gets lost. And the other is that I practice that repair. Just like I said, I go back to kind of those ways that I can, I have talked about this many times before with other organizations, but I talk about like naming your feelings to tame it. So if you're feeling angsty or you're feeling upset about something that has happened and you need to name that feeling of like, I feel really badly, or I feel like a jerk, or I feel like I didn't handle that well, the way to tame it is also then to address it. So we're going to name that feeling, we're going to tame that feeling, and then we're going to address it by repairing it. So thinking about how to practice that repair on that daily kind of rhythm. And then the last one that I really love is having a family meeting. We have board meetings, we have leadership meetings, we have lots of these meetings in those organizations. Let's do it with our family. It can be fun. It can be like ice cream in 5 minutes when you have little kids. It can be Sunday evenings when your kids get a little bit older. If it's just you and a partner, it can still be just as impactful to have those family meetings, right? And just asking, how's the week going? What do we need to change? What do we need to work on? What do we like? Right? It's kind of that highs and lows, if you will, of you personally, but maybe also as a family. So those are the things that I do and I teach others to do.
I love it. I love this, and I'm inspired to want to take these actions. And I've got a really good opportunity here coming up with my own family. So, Ali, I know I am so grateful that you were able to share this. I know others are probably asking themselves, how do I find you? How do I find Ali Schroer? Where and how can I connect with you? Can you describe for a minute, just in general, if somebody wanted to work with you, like what are some of the things that you're doing with organizations and with families?
Yeah, absolutely. So, most of my time these days is really spent with organizations, whether it be law firms or financial firms, professional service firms. But I spend a lot of time, like I said at the beginning, kind of the reactive side, really helping when things maybe are struggling or we're at this crux where things need some support, and then also that proactive side. And so people can reach me by finding me at mentalscopeconsulting.com. My email is there as well. That's my website that kind of describes in more detail what I do. But a lot of the work that I've been doing is thinking about how do we help support people when they feel overwhelmed, when they feel anxious? How do we kind of use anxiety as a superpower, if you will, especially with the changing landscape of today with AI? How do we support some of those kind of technology pieces or changes in the workplace, but really help support that human flourishing and those people on the individual level? We know that when people do well, when their brains feel healthy, when their minds feel well, that they are more creative, that they are more productive, that they are those crushers and those rainmakers in our organizations. They have the capacity to do that. And so my role is really to help figure out how do I help the system with that? And then how do I help individually with that? And so that people can be kind of the strongest and best that they can be.
Well, I can say confidently, we'll include all that information in the show notes. And as always, Ali, thank you for being an ally. Thank you for being united in this mission to elevate human flourishing and to be able to see human flourishing across every dimension of our lives. I just am grateful for you. I can't wait for next time. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks for being here. If today's conversation sparked something in you, we hope you'll carry it forward with curiosity, compassion, and courage. Subscribe to the show, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Until next time, keep exploring what it means to be fully human.